Okay, great. I'm going to start with some introductions. Welcome, everyone. My name is Haley Ross, for those of you who don't know me, and I work with the Columbia Mountains Institute of Applied Ecology. And I'm joined here today by Marcy Marr and Kendall Benesh with the Kootenai Conservation Program. Kendall's going to be in the background, and you'll have a chance to connect and hear Marcy in just a little bit. CMI and KCP have joined forces again to present the 8th season of CMI's Cred Talks, the Columbia Region Ecological Discussion, and KCP's 10th winter webinar series. But before we get going, I'd just like to pause and first acknowledge that the region in which both of our organizations work is the unceded homeland of the Sinixt, the Shickwapam, the Tanaha, and the Syilx Okanagan peoples, who have stewarded and cared for this land, water, and wildlife since time immemorial. And so I'd like to invite you to make your own acknowledgement, if you wish. Using the chat feature, please feel free to introduce yourself and let us know which territory that you're zooming in from today. And as you do that, I'll just talk about the series. So this season of webinars will explore the theme of wildlife corridors and ecological connectivity. We're welcoming 8 speakers who will discuss this theme from different perspectives and provide a wide view that can inform conservation of connected and resilient landscapes in the Columbia Basin. This year's series is financially supported by the Columbia Basin Trust and by LGL. And many thanks to these 2 organizations for ensuring that we can continue to offer this series free of charge. To kick things off today, we have Michael Proctor, who's going to share a success story of how establishing and managing connectivity for grizzly bears in the Creston Valley evolved into a larger initiative to create a regional network of corridors connecting valley bottoms to uplands, biodiversity hotspots, protected areas, and climate refugia in the Kootenays. I'll introduce Michael in more detail in just a moment. And thanks for those of you who are introducing yourself and noting the territories you're zooming in from today. While you do that and continue to do that, I just want to take a moment to tell you really briefly about CMI. CMI is a nonprofit society and an association for people working in the various fields of ecology. We provide professional development opportunities in the form of conferences, courses, and webinars, of course, on everything from skill-based research techniques to land management conundrums. Our website is the best place to learn more about what we do, or to connect with me via email or phone anytime. And on our website are proceeding documents and recordings from lots of our major events, lots of fantastic resources there. So I'd like now to just pass it over to Marcy Marr with KCP.
Thanks, Haley. Hello, everyone. So I'm Marcy Marr, and I'm joining you on behalf of the Kootenai Conservation Program, or KCP. And we're a diverse network of more than 85 land and water conservation and stewardship groups, federal, provincial, and local governments, First Nations, land trusts, agricultural producers, and educational institutions who contribute to conserving our region. The purpose of KCP's partnership is to cooperatively conserve and steward landscapes that sustain biodiversity and naturally functioning ecosystems, and to generate the support and resources needed to advance these efforts, including building technical knowledge in webinars like this. And we're very excited to be hosting this webinar series again with CMI, and would like to give an additional thanks to our program sponsors, without whom we would not be able to offer events like this. Now, just a couple of housekeeping details and we'll get started. So this webinar is being recorded and it'll be posted within a week to both CMI's event page and KCP's winter webinar series webpage. So both organizations' websites will have the recording available. And we'll have a Q&A at the end of Michael's presentation, so please use the Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar and add a question at any time during Michael's presentation, and we'll do our best to make our way through them. Okay, over to you, Haley.
Thanks very much, Marcy. So I just want to add that there's a fun feature with that Q&A option where you can upvote questions that you might like to hear the answer to. So you'll see once questions start populating in there, and feel free to put your questions in at any time as they occur to you. And if you see a question that you'd like to hear the answer to as well, you just thumbs up it. And then that'll help order the questions in priority sequence. So without further ado, let's introduce Michael Proctor, who's going to be presenting landscape connectivity from a wildlife biologist perspective. And I just have a short bio here that I would like to read. Michael is a conservation-focused research scientist who uses science to understand and inform conservation problems and solutions related to bears and large carnivores, and more recently, ecological connectivity. He has focused on small isolated threatened populations requiring higher conservation attention, including population recovery, population fragmentation, and connectivity. And he's spent his over 25-year career integrating and implementing conservation solutions to real-world conservation problems, including managing people as well as bears. Beyond bears, he also helps run Kootenay Connect, a multi-partner project working to enhance ecological connectivity, biodiversity, and climate resilience across the Kootenay region. Michael, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I will screen share.
Perfect.
Very nice introduction, Haley. Not sure all that's true, but we'll see today. Being a fossil in terms of Facebook, I didn't really anticipate it to be so many viewers from around the world. So I apologize for some of the geographic information if it's not completely relevant to all of you. I'll try to keep up with a widespread audience. I'd like to really also point out that really many other people have been contributed to what I'm about to talk about today. And you'll see their faces and names throughout the talk, so note them. So, you know, I've been living on the coast for about a year now, and I've been doing a lot of open water ocean swimming with seals, sea lions, humpback whales, and killer whales swimming around at the same time. Been quite exciting. So let's just dive in with me here, you guys, if you don't mind. So this is a animated radio-collared bear that got moved up into the Purcell Mountains. This is the Purcell Mountains of the Rockies, and he's trying to move himself back across to the Rocky Mountains, and you can see his path. And he finally worked across the mountains down here just north of Columbia Lake. It'll all make sense more and more. And these yellow shaded areas are predicted corridors of some work I did in 2015. And so anyway, the bear moved across the northern part of Columbia Lake, and now he's just about to den up here in Kootenay National Park. It's kind of cool. And you'll note the colors of the dots relate to the months that he's there. And he's just about to switch over from 2022. Oops, now we're in 23. So he's come out of the den. He's moving around again, and he's actually headed over to this other corridor. That's pretty cool. So my friends, when they started seeing this, thought that I had actually put a drone on a radio collar, and we call this the drone bear because he crossed through so many interesting places and went through these corridors we predicted. The data predicting these corridors was done sort of far away. So I'm going to move on to the next slide just because it gets more interesting. And so we're going to do a little close-up of this area down by the Columbia wetlands, excuse me, the Columbia Lake. And we're going to have the same kind of thing. Now, here's the bear coming into this area, and he's moving along. The black dots are human buildings. The colored things are different ownerships of conservation properties in the area. So you can see there's a pretty rich conservation landscape here. So the bear's sort of trying to figure out how am I going to get across this valley, but he's doing a very good job of avoiding people. This is sort of an unusually smart bear who had it together. And so now he crossed, and I'd like to point out this piece of land right here was just recently purchased by the Nature Trust of BC for this purpose, for landscape connectivity down in this wetland. So it's a pretty cool little story what these guys, what this bear did. And the reason I'm showing you all this is in the beginning is this is landscape connectivity. This is what we're trying to accomplish. This is the bear, my drone bear, working in our favor here. So it's a pretty cool story to see it in action. And you know, and I'm just going to shoot to a Google Earth view of this. This is a big subdivision of people living along the lake. And north here we have the Fairmont Hot Springs and an airport and a bunch of humanity in this valley. And this bear had figured out this wetlands complex to decide where to cross. So it's pretty interesting story to start this thing, but this is really what this talk is about. on the ground. This is what it looks like down there in those wetlands. It's a pretty cool place in the middle of a human settled valley, the headwaters of the Columbia River. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a lot of different topics, but we're going to talk about biodiversity conservation just for a few slides here. And some of this stuff is what I call science of the obvious. A lot of the people on this call understand this stuff, but these are just some concepts to get out there so we're all on the same page. But it looks like, you know, there's been quite a bit of evidence that the extinction rate in our current times is much higher than historic times. This paper indicates it was maybe 100 times above normal, but it's there's been a lot of estimates, but the point is it's elevated. And human land use been leading to biodiversity loss is a paper by Newbold, and this is a correlation between the amount of disturbance on the landscape, the redder areas, and then the loss of species richness, which is the amount of species sort of per area. So more people disturbance, less biodiversity. This is a slide about forest integrity, which is kind of relevant to where we live. We live in a forested environment up here in southern Canada, and it talks about how lower integrity leads to loss of ecological function and biodiversity, the more disturbance there is. And this is kind of a cool way to look at it, but they looked at the area that are distance from roads and its relationship to biodiversity. And they found that habitat fragmentation of forests can reduce biodiversity up to 13 to 75% by decreasing the biomass and disrupting the cycles. And I wanted to just make it clear that there's a biodiversity crisis going on. I think you guys all believe that, but really my main point is to bring that back to Canada. We often think of that as a problem in the Amazon or Borneo or some Southeast Asia or place, but really it's happening here in Canada. It's a really cool report, the Wild Species 2000. You can note I put a lot of the references at the bottom. If people want to find them later on, they can review the video and look up these references, but it's a cool report. Of the 80,000 species estimated in Canada, 50,000 of them were assessed in this report, and we have 512 critically imperiled. This is by the NatureServe system, similar but slightly different than the IUCN system. 1,200 imperiled and 2,700 vulnerable. Of those ranked, that's 1 in 5 species in Canada that's at some level of population risk. So that is also a Canadian problem besides outside of the Amazon. In British Columbia, of the 24,000 species we have, about 7,500 have been ranked, 502 are critically imperiled, 1,113 imperiled, and 2,900 vulnerable. That's 1 in 3.5 of those ranked at some population, some level of risk. So these global problems are here in our front yard. So just I actually had to convince myself of that too. I've been living in British Columbia most of my life, and it's you know, amazingly natural and wonderful still, but we still have these global problems coming on our doorstep. And this is now for the people far away. This is the local area we live in. It's called the West Kootenays. This is Alberta to the right and British Columbia to the left, and it's and this is from the data from the BC Conservation Center, and we have 142 listed species within our area. 241 are listed as vulnerable. The 142 are critically imperiled. They're sort of grouped a little differently, but you can get a sense that, you know, not only is the problem in Canada, but it's right here in our front yard in what we call the Kootenay region. And the governments of Canada is sort of finally recognizing this stuff. The world is, the IUCN's been onto these ideas for over a decade, but it's coming into all our countries, and we've recognized our need to use our federal land and water to contribute to the 30 by 30 nature conservation. You've all heard of the 30 by 30 goal. It's where we protect 30% of the land and water by 2030 to increase or maintain biodiversity maintenance and increase climate resilience. And Canada's also started a national ecological corridors program. It's not a mistake that they put grizzly bears on the cover of their webpage. I didn't lobby him to do that, but anyway, it's a pretty cool program. And the latest paradigm in biodiversity conservation, we've just signed a 2030 national biodiversity strategy at the federal level. And so the federal government is tuned into these issues and starting to do things about it. The British Columbia government has just signed a tripartite nature conservation framework with the federal government and the First Nation leaders across Canada, British Columbia. It's a pretty cool thing. We looked, Marcy and I looked through the web pages of the British Columbia government. We can't find the word connect and connectivity, so it hasn't been necessarily integrated into this. If the government's listening, we're watching, and in a happy way. But we do know that the British Columbia government is considering connectivity. We're in discussions with them about it, and we've talked quite a bit about it. So it's just nothing formal yet, but we're looking forward to some formal acknowledgement of connectivity, how it's a necessary part of this whole story. So improved ecological connectivity and a network of protected areas is also really important for climate resilience beyond biodiversity protection. I have a few slides to talk about that real quick. I don't have to convince anyone that climate change is in our face. These are British Columbia photos of extreme wildfire and flooding and wildlife disasters in stream. These are dead salmon. And so this is a paper written in 2009 that did a review of climate change management, and the most common theme for recommended strategy was to improve connectivity for climate change adaptation, a paper by Heller and Sabelita. Also, interesting, it may work in both ways. Climate change can mediate fragmentation, and fragmentation exacerbates the effects of climate change. You can't win, can we? I mean, it's coming at it from both directions. And this is my last science paper slide for folks, but it's possibly maybe one of the more important ones, a seminal work for all of the above concepts, trying to move forward towards solutions and actions. It's IUCN Conservation Guidelines by Hilty et al. And it's really an encyclopedia on the topics of the ecological corridors. The link there is too big to copy down. You'll have to come back and look for it. But anyway, it's a really cool, essential reading for anybody on this topic. And so what is, they define ecological connectivity. I'm going to boil it down for you real quickly. It's really the movement of everything. And corridors should be defined with areas with specific governance. And it's really not parks. They're not parks. Corridors allow other ecological friendly activities. So it's a really complex situation, mainly because they include public and private land. It's challenging for government to manage both. So these ideas have spread around the world thoroughly. This is an old slide, maybe 3 or 4 years old, of large-scale connectivity projects, almost on all continents except Antarctica. And it's pretty impressive. And recently, there's been an explosion of ecological corridor projects around the world. There's just a spattering of them. I put our project in there just so we could get on the map. But it's pretty amazing what's being done. And it should be noted that these all aren't finished or anything. They're just started and initiated. And they're all in the stages like we are. And we're all sort of forging new territory on how to work through ecological corridors. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this website, the Center for Large-Scale Conservation. It's really one of the hubs of a lot of these ecological projects around the world, and it keeps track of up to 2,000 different projects. And it's an extremely interesting and well-kept website for people who are really interested in this stuff. They keep a map of the world and all the projects around the world. Here's all the projects as they go around. As you can see, it's very impressive, the amount of work that's being done. So in essence, ecological connectivity is a powerful mediator of climate adaptation. It allows for rain shifts, ecosystem changes, and wildlife movements. But the big theme is protected areas are not really enough alone. We needed a functioning ecological corridor network. Hate to read a slide, but it's a pretty important point to make. Now I'm going to get down to real things, back to wildlife here. I'll have a little more fun. So this is an example of how fragmentation can lead to biodiversity loss. Joel Berger wrote this paper 25 years ago about the history of bighorn sheep extirpations in all the small populations across the western United States that were smaller than 50 animals. It's really challenging to be a small fragmented population. It's one of the mechanisms with which we lose animals, species. Well, distributions within a species and sometimes the whole species. And more close to home for me, we're going to finally get to grizzly bears. This is a similar situation back in the 1920s. The pink here and the darker gold here were all the grizzly bear populations in the 1920s that were isolated and small. And by 1970, they were pretty much all gone. The only ones that were left were the larger ones that are sort of connected to Canada and then the Yellowstone. So it doesn't speak well for being a small isolated population. And so this is kind of where I came into the scene, understanding. I wasn't very young. I started my PhD when I was 50. I don't recommend anybody doing that, but I started working on grizzly bears, which really were I came to learn, a decent connectivity umbrella. They require variation within low, medium, and high elevation habitats. This is some bears me and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service radio collared over 10 or 15 years. You can see the bears go everywhere. They use high alpine, low elevation stuff, but they also require, and you're going to see this in the next few minutes, a metapopulation with huge areas where we have multiple populations where they can move between to be solid. And that past example in history sort of teaches us that. And of course, they're very sensitive to human disturbance. And this idea has got some traction. Stenwig et al. Looked at grizzly bears from a quantitative standpoint as being related to species richness. And so it's cool. What's good for grizzly bears is good for many other species, but also the reverse is true. What's good for other species, a lot of other species can also be good for grizzly bears. So we can look at it in both ways. And so I did went out and through my PhD, gathered up to about 3,100 samples from myself and then many other people in the landscape you can see, and the data from 800 telemetry bears. And we looked at fragmentation patterns across the whole West. And the shaded area is that remnant distribution of bears. And the long and short of 10 years of my life, I'm going to boil down to these yellow dotted lines, are just the female fragmentation lines. Males kind of move generally across those lines, but females don't. But we're all pretty much aware, at least half of you are pretty aware how unimportant males can be. And they're just usually ovary or expendable sperm packets. Females are the reproductive engine of a lot of biological species. And so this created a job opportunity for me. I realized I wanted to spend my career trying to see if I could undo some of those yellow lines. And I sort of lived near this South Selkirk population this is the one population beside Yellowstone that was completely isolated. No movement and sex crossed any of those highways for the bears in and out of that population for several decades. So I decided to I joined forces with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and called myself the Transborder Grizzly Bear Project. And basically for years it was just me, and then now it's me and Grant McCutcheon, but we do work closely with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So we went out and radio collared bears for 15 years and learned a lot. We've developed a habitat model, which is the green is the good habitat, but our main goal is to identify corridors, all the yellow patches across the human settled highways that we realized were fragmenting the bears. And sorry, I meant to say that these yellow lines are associated with all the highways and human settlement corridors in our mountainous landscape. And here we were trying to find the corridors across them. The one I was going to talk about today was there's a large Kootenai Lake here that blocks a lot of corridor movement, but the main way to move is to the south from this large population here of maybe 600 animals to get them into the Selkirks and into the States, into the Yak and into the Cabinets. This was my dreamscape when I started. And so we radio caught a lot of bears, but I really came up against a wall here. Learning how to manage wildlife really is more how to manage people. These are my PhD supervisors that taught me how to manage people. They're an effective group of instructors. So for 15 years, I'm going to boil a lot of work down here real quickly, but in 15 years, I put up maybe over 100 electric fences, not me, but I raised the money for it. And some people, Jillian Sanders with the Grizzly Bear Solutions project, put up over 100 electric fences along the periphery of this population to minimize conflicts. We've taught a lot of bear spray and bear safety courses. We created a program where we imitated what they did in Montana, where they used non-lethal management on bears. We had about a 50% success rate with their females, much less so with males. And I'm sure half of you also understand the learning capacity between the sexes can be different. It's hard to teach a subadult male anything, if it's a bear or a person, whatever. But anyway, we had a pretty good success rate with keeping these females alive instead of having them, traditionally they were removed from the population. Very effective part of the thing. We also had strategic land purchases. We teamed up with the Nature Conservancy Canada. In this area, we bought over 300 hectares of land strategically placed from our modeling to enhance connectivity. We bought in the larger region, the whole transborder region, we bought over $50 million worth of land, not the Nature Conservancy, but many land trusts, and protecting over 200 square kilometers of land for connectivity. It's a pretty effective program. And then we did some wildlife, we did some food research. We determined the huckleberry patches were extremely important to bears in the region. And the Nature Conservancy owned a large chunk of land up here called the Darkwoods property. And they had closed quite a few roads for the benefit of bears and caribou and other critters. And it turned out to be a very important sort of an artesian well of grizzly bear thing, because the habitat was such a high quality, and the food supply increased fitness and increased density of bears up there. So this is part of the whole program that went together. And so, you know, I was just going to cut to how this all worked and how it all is all wonderful, but I thought I'd show you a little cool piece of data that you don't see very often. This is some of the, we had a real increase in connectivity into the southern Selkirks, so I'm about to show you from all the work in the Creston Valley, which is right in here, that was stopping bears through historic mortality from getting into the Selkirks. But we eventually caught a bear, Bob. He was the big, meanest bear I've ever seen. He was over 20 years old, pretty grumpy little bugger. And then his mate there, Maeve, was also an elder. These are sort of senior citizens of the bear community. But anyway, they were still pretty active in their youth. And they sired up many offspring, one of them, which was Captain Hook, who had been shot in the leg and was still a very healthy guy. He moved in as a migrant into the South Selkirks. And he was, even though he had we called him Captain Hook because he sort of had a peg leg. He would kind of hobble around, but he was a serious bear. And he bred with 8 different females and put out 13 different offspring. This is connectivity. This is gene flow. This is increased. This population was completely isolated for over 50 years. So all this work is this is just one really cool example of what we've learned through genetic sampling and radio telemetry combination. And you can see there's a lot of data we collected before 2006 and other researchers. So with that, a lot of data, we only detected very few migrants. But since 2006, after all our work, we've seen a lot of migrants. And essentially, there's been like we've documented 9 migrants that have bred 27 offspring, a little bit like Captain Hook. And this has led us to write a report. We did a big survey in the last few years that evaluating the grizzly bear conservation management. This is the success story that Haley was referring to, where we took a completely isolated population that was highly threatened in British Columbia and pretty much recovered it. You know, at least this is for the Canadian portion of the population. I got to mention the U.S. data is in, and we're going to publish an international story here pretty soon. But right now, I'm just talking about the Canadian portion. And it's pretty much been recovered. Beyond the increase in connectivity, we've seen an increase in numbers. So it's a pretty cool story. And really, this is the Creston Valley. This is that valley in there. It's a lot of agriculture, but this half of it is a big wildlife management area and a lot of people living in it. And so this is the arena that we worked in. So not only were bears crossing this area, but while we were working, one of the bears came down and he moved into one of the leopard frog habitats, and the leopard frog researchers just scattered like flies. Once they found that out, they were pretty worried that he was down there, maybe looking for them, or it was a pretty big bear that was down there. It was actually Bob, the big male that I talked about, a big grumpy guy who brought us to there. But it turns out there's a leopard frog corridor in there where they move between breeding and foraging habitat and winter overranging right in there. So within the grizzly bear corridor is this leopard frog habitat. And it turns out the bear wasn't after anybody. He didn't eat any frogs, and he was just after some spring food, but it was a fun story. Anyway, this is the arena. That's what it looks like. So I started thinking a little differently about things, thinking about other species beyond bears. And I discovered what I call the 20-inch link zone. And this is an area that's just got I put a remote camera up there, and you can see this well-worn worn trail coming out of the mountains into the valley. And over the summer, we picked up just about every animal that you can think of going through this corridor, including a unusual form of a primate we found in the woods out there. I don't know where the guy still is, but at any rate, so I started thinking bigger, and this is a model I had for riparian habitat. So I overlapped riparian habitat with connectivity habitat, that yellow from the previous map, and I would find these areas of overlap, thinking a little bigger about it. And then I did that across the whole region, and I found that these grizzly bear corridors were highly associated with some of these big riparian hotspots, and there was a real strong association. So it turns out there's other evidence along these lines. I was invited to a multi-day workshop where we looked at these ideas among a whole spectrum of species with a lot of experts, and we realized we had a story to tell, that these valley bottoms were becoming important conservation areas. And this is part of that paper, the Hauer et al. It's a pretty cool paper that looks at, it shows that the biodiversity is really, the valley bottoms are punching above their weight in terms of biodiversity conservation, and also it's an arena for conservation action. So it's a pretty cool paper if you ever get a chance to have a look at it. So the human settled valleys were becoming an important conservation arena, but I had made some progress in it before, so I thought, why can't we make some progress looking at multiple species and looking for biodiversity hotspots and more species at risk, and expand the way I started looking at things. And so Kootenai Connect was born, a vision of ecological corridors across the region. And it started out just a blank in my mind, and this is what I was evolving into thinking about, just a myriad of unidentified connected landscape. And I started gathering data on a bunch of multi-species, and it started to take shape. We would look for biodiversity hotspots, enhancing restoration habitat, and planning for climate resilience at all. But it was also connecting people and connecting projects to connect landscape. And I can't say any of this without mentioning Marcy Marr and Juliet Craig. I think the Kootenai Connect got started drinking beer somewhere. One evening, we all talked about it and decided we'd make a project. I think Marcy came up with a name, but anyway, it's got 12 core partners and 35 in total. We work on a lot of species at risk. We've got 40 species of concern. We've got 50 sub-projects over the years. We're looking at almost $4 million over 7 years by Environment and Climate Change Canada, over 16,000 square kilometers of land. It's gotten a little bit out of hand. I have to admit, I was a little taken aback by all this, and my retirement is looking a little distant. I'm 126, so it's going to be a while before I can really finally settle down. So I started collecting data from the best available habitat for multi-species data, and obviously the grizzly bears came up as one of the options, as I've mentioned. So we had that data to hand on, but there was many other, well, I thought I'd bring us, instead of maps, we'd actually look at some real good grizzly habitat, just to let you guys know that life isn't always on Zoom. This is a really good huckleberry habitat with a bear family eating in it. There's also been some other good research. Mowat et al. In 2000 published a good analysis of, this is not a habitat model, but a wolverine density model. Blue is dense and purple is denser. And they also did an excellent expert-based marmot habitat model, which is one of the main wolverine foods. So it's a very useful piece of data for the region. These are not isolated populations by any stretch, but they're sort of habitat clusters. But they suggest there may be some fragmentation going on in the southern part of the distribution, similar to what we see with grizzly bears. And they haven't, they're in the midst of, wolverine researchers are trying to do some corridor work. We haven't seen the results yet, but I'm sure any minute it'll pop out. Wolverine, an amazing critter, and they got some really wonderful looking habitat, which we all recreate in most of the time. There's one person on the call who will recognize that picture. That's their daughter. I won't say anymore. It was too good of a shot. Western toads turned out on the other extreme to be a very important species locally. These are a bunch of the important breeding ponds with a 7-kilometer buffer around them, sort of the dispersal distance of a Western toad. We don't know enough about the meta populations of them, but they're a listed species that we need to keep considering, and we have some data for. American Bear, this is a database model in the East Kootenays, up in the Columbia Trench, done by Kinley et al. From an extremely good model that's driving a lot of conservation. This is what it's a more open habitat, good badger habitat looks like. Elk are extremely culturally important, extremely important species in our region. Kelly Mulligan did her master's on modeling habitat in the southern portion. Kootenai Connect hired her to run her model up there. We use that for a lot of our thinking. And mountain goat has been a very good data-based mountain goat model by the government researchers. Ross and Vander Venen did an extremely good job. I've seen the real data that underpins this, a good model. In the West Kootenays, it's not as there's not as much data, so it's not as clean. But over in the East Kootenays, it's a very good model. Excuse me. And they like the high escape terrain up in the mountains. A lot of those habitats, that's what they look like. Bighorn sheep. There's another. This is a similarly data-based model from government data. Poole and Ayotte did, and it's delineating summer and winter range. But so it turns out there was quite a bit of at least large mammal data in our region. And I was a little bit surprised by how much data there was. I scattered around on everybody's computer and was looking at it. So then an opportunity came along from this old idea in my head. The Environment and Climate Change Canada was offering a Nature Fund grant. So Marcy and Juliet and I and many others that you're about to see put in a grant, and somehow or other we scored a $2 million grant over 4 years, and which has now been expanded to almost $4 million over 7 years. So we spent that $4 million on conservation efforts in these 4 areas, and I'm gonna quickly run through a little bit of what some of the how that money was spent and how we've been hopefully changing the ecological corridor nature of our region. The first place I'm going to talk about, you'll start to see some of the people who've led these groups. Dr. Suzanne Bailey, a world-class wetland ecologist, and she's an amazing person to go out and into the wetlands with. She's just like reading a book with her. It's really, really fun. So that's about 200 kilometers north to south. It's an internationally recognized wetland, and much of it is a wildlife management area. It's an obvious north-south corridor, but it's also an arena for east and west corridors. And it's just a magnificent, long, 200-kilometer long wetlands that's very, very complex. And then, so you saw all the data that of all these other big games. I took a lot of those data and tried to look at where there might be cross-border or cross-valley corridors within that. We took a lot of that data and combined it with other species at risk data collected by Rachel Darville. She did an extremely good job over 3 years. There's 3 or 4 reports she has, and it's just an amazing amount of smaller critters that are species at risk in the region. And then we also, well, she looked at a lot of different facets about it. Western painted turtles and nesting sites, some of which have been enhanced for their basking logs, and areas of high concentration for birds and Lewis woodpecker nesting sites. And we took it, we made a spaghetti map, and we tried to, can we find a pattern out of this? And that was a challenge. But we also had some other layers. We looked to one of our regional ecologists turned climate specialist, Greg Utzik, who put out a climate model. And we put all this into our brains and tried to come up with some east-west corridors. And so the science committee from the Columbia Wetlands identified these 4 corridors across the valley. And just to give you a sense of how that might be used conservation-wise, we itemized, we thought it was we were looking for biodiversity hotspots, but we realized the whole place was a biodiversity hotspot. But we used that to maybe target some of these properties that the Nature Conservancy might buy. And, you know, this is the piece of land that was featured in my opening video that a bear crossed across, and it had just been bought by the Nature Trust of BC. Sort of ties how all this thinking and work comes together to be an actual conservation win and turn it into a bear movement and more else. The Columbia Wetlands, they've also done vulnerable wetlands identification, hydrologic connectivity from climate change. They've looked at which wetlands we're going to need management and hydrological connectivity that are at risk of being lost from climate change, and a lot of other things. It's almost impossible to list all the things this group has done. But at any rate, I have to move on. I can see my time's bustling along. We're moving over to the smallest corridor in the Bonanza. It's just, even though it's smaller, it punches above its weight for a lot of different reasons. And it's a magnificent rich valley, almost mid-elevation valley in the West Kootenays. And the Slocan Lake Stewardship Society, I think it's run by Wendy King, I hope. But at any rate, they might have a rotating set of groups, but Wendy is a extreme good advocate for a lot of these projects. They've done a lot of different things in their area. They've a lot of wetland restoration across this, along this. This is their sort of planning. They've had 3 big areas that they did. There's 2 biodiversity buffs, and you haven't lived till you've seen one of them disappear into a wetland marshy thicket for a couple minutes and emerge with the tiniest slime mold you've ever seen on the tip of their finger that you can only see with a little loop. It's truly amazing. These guys are pretty impressive. They've documented over 1,400 species in the valley, 55 of them which are species at risk. They're pretty cool people. And this group has brought together, after 3 or 4 years of a lot of restoration and analytical work, a large conservation management plan for the whole area. It's very thorough. It's hard to stop these people. You know, their main goal is to also establish a corridor between these 2 large provincial parks through the biodiversity corridor. It's pretty amazing stuff. Over to Wycliffe, which is a different sort of area. It's kind of a combination of wetlands and dry grassland. It's a pretty cool spot. Richard Klofke and the Nature Conservancy Canada and Chris Bosman of Nature Trust of BC are the leaders there, also with the province of BC. Alana Ostrich works with them, I think, a little bit and stuff. And they've focused in on species at risk, the Williamson sapsucker and the Lewis woodpecker, and their habitat enhancement. They've kind of almost a little bit grassland management, thinning trees, invasive plant management, and wildlife friendly fences. And that's been a pretty cool what they've focused on. And then now the last one we're going to look at is Creston. And we've already talked about that a lot, so there's not much to say here, but there's a couple little things in the Frog Bear corridor. Marc-Andre Boucher has been the leader there, has been running the Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area for maybe 2 decades. I don't know, how old is that guy getting? But at any rate, they've done a lot of habitat restoration across valley. We bought the land through the Nature Conservancy, but we needed to also restore it so it would be better function for a lot of these critters. So they've rebuilt some amazing wetlands in the area, and they've taken some of the area. We've been out on a lot of field trips and identified areas where we're growing a lot of cover back, so it'll be better for large mammals to move through there and stay safe. And all the different groups that have worked down here, there's a lot that have worked there I had to gloss over, but the Nature Conservancy Canada got inspired to sort of create it looks like we're gonna have a webinar soon. Looks like they put a sign up in the valley about how it's turned into sort of a people's ecological corridor. It's a pretty cool sign, just itemizing all the different facets have gone into it, and sort of acknowledging that this area is important for connectivity. It's a pretty cool sign. This real quickly, there's a couple other projects that are sort of go across the whole region that span many of the corridors. Some great blue heron work by Marlene Mockmer has been really good. A lot of nest site activity, and it's resulted in some habitat features, wildlife habitat features. Bat conservation is big in the Kootenays. They've done a lot of surveys of old growth dependent species and others. They're monitoring species trends within the North American monitoring program. There's been a lot of roost enhancement. It's run by Corey Lawson, the Wildlife Conservation Society, and Heather Gates. They go out and put out these branded bark old growth mimics that, because we've had diminishing old growth, some of these old growth species need it, and hopefully until it's a temporary solution until we can grow some old growth back. At any rate, the bats love it, and it is a pretty cool project. So all that information is written down in what Marcy and I affectionately call the beast, and it's just 250 pages of, but it's really a documentation of all this stuff and all the details that I've skimmed over here in the last half hour. We discussed 8 more corridors than the ones that I've discussed here, and it's a pretty cool thing. And, you know, if you have insomnia, it's just like any other scientific paper. It'll help you get to sleep at night. So just like to also to mention that because of Environment Canada and Climate Change Canada has extended our program, we're now working in 7 corridors, sort of like the ones I've just described here. It's pretty cool, a lot of work. I'm not going to go into in any detail. And one other little sidebar, we used to call it a trunk of a tree, but now I'm calling it, because I live on the coast, another arm to the octopus of Kootenai Connect. We have started a working group, a function group that's looking at a policy level, trying to work on get a pilot ecological corridor established and recognized by government in the Columbia Lake area. I'm not going to go into it in much detail, just to let you know we're working with the provincial government, Parks Canada, BC Parks, and 2 of the nations in our region, Tanaha and the Shuswap, are pretty heavily involved, and we're working towards developing policy. See if we can get something done here. It's a pretty cool initiative. This is the Google Earth view of that area. So this whole project is really where the rubber meets the road on all the global, national, and provincial initiatives for biodiversity. I think that was a Marcy Marr quote. But anyway, we hope to continue this work and succeed, both from the bottom up and from the top down level in the future. And I do have 20 seconds for my 40 minutes, which is a miracle. And I wanted to end with a really cool little shot. And this is, can all this stuff really happen up here in Canada, where we, and in the United States and a lot of the world? And I had to research how it was going in the rest of the world. And I found that it was really some amazing examples. This is Costa Rica, which you've all heard about, protects about 28% of their country. Well, they've got an ecological corridor program. They started in 2006, and they've protected in 44 corridors, 38% of their country. A private and public land is a combination in these corridors. Absolutely amazing. They have local councils, and they have payment for environmental services. They pay private landowners to set aside a portion of their land for conservation, because they have some large ranches that works on watershed stability, biodiversity protections, carbon sequestering. It's absolutely amazing. And a lot of it's funded by pollution fines, and there's a lot of beneficiaries of ecological services. Anyway, it's a really cool program, and they share this land sharing ethic. Even though you own the land, you don't really own it. You got to give it back to the world. So that's my parting shot to tell you this is all possible. I am exactly 1 minute over time. Very impressive for me. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. That was fabulous, and you covered so much ground, such good synthesis. So it's great to have this be the first webinar in our webinar series this year.
Maybe a little too much ground. I apologize. Should I stop sharing, or what's my role here?
Haley, do you want him to stop sharing his slides?
Yeah, why don't you stop? Well, I'd leave your presentation available in case you want to go back to it for the questions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'll start working through some of the questions here, and let's see. So James Baxter from the Colville Confederated Tribes, the next Confederacy, was asking, are there any examples of commercial exclusion zones being used in critical wildlife habitats? And if so, how are they working?
Thanks for that question. I did some work on huckleberries, and we developed a huckleberry model, which is in our area the most important bear food, drives their population. And it's not the case everywhere, but it happens to be the case where we live. And it's become pretty popular for land use planning a lot of ways. But one of the ways we use it, the government got excited about it, is we have limited the commercial huckleberry harvest, which was going on right in the middle of some of the threatened populations up against the border. And they actually used this model and let me sort of draw the areas which were most important to the bears. So that was one of the really important ways. I'm trying to think of some other ways. But anyway, that's an extremely good example of that. Give some other people a chance.
Great. And here's a question from Hannah Neiman. Has there been a significant genetic difference observed in populations, I'm assuming grizzly bear populations, that have been isolated for multiple generations versus those that are more integrated?
Another good question. The southern Selkirks had a lowered heterozygosity, so does the Yellowstone and any isolated population than in neighboring populations. But it takes a really long time to elevate and move genes into a population, and so you can actually measure. But given that, even though it takes a long time, in the 15 years, we've noticed an uptick in a slight, maybe not statistically significant, but increase in that level of heterozygosity within the southern Selkirk population, and the presence of more alleles within the genome. So we're seeing those 9 migrant animals of males and females that have moved into that population have brought their genes in. And it's part of the cool thing of using genetic techniques in addition to the telemetry techniques. They really allow you to start seeing in color what's going on. We're measuring, we're monitoring and detecting the gene flow with the telemetry, and then we're finding out its effects with the genetics. It's pretty cool. But it's a slow process, but we've watched it improve, which is a little bit amazing. I was shocked that we had a signal.
Great. So there's been some questions that have come up both in the chat and Q&A. Yes, this will all be recorded. And for those of you that want to look at the recording, take a pause and really study a map or get more information, please rely on the recording to do that.
And just in that line, Marcy, let me say, I knew I was going to put a little bit too much information in there and move pretty quickly, but it was really hard to figure out who I was going to leave out. So I tried to leave a trail with the papers and the web links to them. So hopefully, if you're actually interested, you go in there and look.
Excellent. Okay, another question from Eric. I think he pronounces it Pakaila. I am wondering if the huge 1985 wildfire around Canal Flats is part of an important biodiversity hotspot, a location in the east-west corridor. I'm thinking the Columbia Lake corridor you mentioned, Michael, and or is it an ecological desert and provides very few ecological benefits?
All right, this is a real easy question to answer. I don't know. Sorry. That's a good question. And part of our team, we have a team, part of the Tanaha team has a fire program going. And so some of the guys on our team are going to know that. I've talked about 25 subjects. I'm an expert on 3 of them. So sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. But we could put you in touch with somebody who does know probably knows the answer to that question. We talk with them all the time.
Okay.
Sorry.
So Hillary Young is asking, she says, really informative presentation. Thank you. Are you able to say more about the pilot corridor in partnership with Parks Canada, BC Parks, First Nations, etc., that you alluded to near the end?
Yeah, it didn't have much time for it, and it's in progress. Whoops, sorry, I just lost you guys. We've been working on it for 3 years. It was a real slow start to bring everybody together and get a bunch of frame of references. We've got a project charter that lays out what we're doing. We've had a process for choosing ecological corridors because we had all that data I presented, but it was like that spaghetti map. Where is the pattern? And so a bunch of people, maybe 10 or 20 or 30, we developed a process for selecting which areas were corridors, and then we developed a process for choosing which one we'd use for a pilot. I'm a favorite of pilot projects, just to see, before you spend a lot of energy, let's see if you can make something work. And we've had, interestingly, some interest from the provincial government. They tracked us down. They've heard about us and contacted us and wanted to learn more about it. And we're in discussions. And they have volunteered to be part of our team, even though they're it was the local provincial government that was in our group, but the provincial government has sort of tracked us down, and they've indicated a great interest in helping us shape how policy might work and be relevant and useful for the world. We don't want to have irrelevant policy. We want to make sure it actually works. So we're moving along. We've actually raised a little money to continue. So that's all I'll say for now. I was thinking this would go nowhere 3 years ago. I'm completely impressed how we're moving along and progressing. So being a pessimist on that end, I was proven wrong. So look forward to some more interesting information in the future here.
Okay, and hi, Elka. So Elka Wind is asking how do we connect habitats for species that operate at different scales, such as toads and bears?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, I was a bear biologist, so this was a bear heavy conversation. But, you know, for instance, Western toad, and Marcy should actually answer this question. I'll do it just for the fun of it. But one of our corridors is in the Rotalic area where there's a extremely prolific breeding ponds up on the high pass, high elevation, and the toadlets come in to breed and go back up into the high country, and they got to cross the highway. And there's teams that sit out there and help and count and get cars through without killing toads. The same thing at Summit Lake, another area, and they're built crossing under the highway crossing structures. And there was a homemade one as a couple of years ago, but I think they've raised enough money and made a really good professional one, really solid. So we are working at all those scales all at once, and that's where I apologize for not being able to go into a lot of the details, but it's a very good question. And so we're trying to be multi-scale about it. It's about way more than grizzly bears. Grizzly bears go anywhere they want. You just got to not kill them. But a lot of those other critters have a hard time getting through. So we're working through the species that are relevant in each different corridor. The relevance of the species, the suite of species that are relevant in any one corridor changes as you move around. And so, yes, that's maybe one example of that. Did I do okay there, Marcy?
Good enough for now. Yes. Good job. So let's see, maybe we've got time for one more. This is an interesting one. See what you think here. Is there a template available for the process that was followed towards establishing an ecological corridor for people who are just starting out? What would your advice be? There may not be a template, but what's your best advice there, Michael?
Yeah, there are probably many templates, and they're all being developed as we speak. I noticed the Canadian government just came out with a template, and I'm sure I would recommend going to the Hilti 2020, the IUCN guidelines. It's very thorough thinking, and they have an example in the end at their appendix. There's many examples of there, and we have our own template, and we're in the process of trying to integrate our ideas with the thoughts from others that farther afield. Like a lot of these corridors, when we develop them, I would consider them a little bit hypotheses at this point. We're sort of in the process of learning as we go. So, you know, at some point, maybe in a little while, we might let our process out of the bag, you know, where I'm not sure we're confident enough in it to have it be competing with something that's in the Hilti thing. But look around and you'll find several, and hopefully they'll all converge on something that matters. One point I'd like to make about that: Canada-wide has developed a process in that national program, and they put out a map of corridors. But what I've not criticizing it in any way, shape, or form, it's very impressive that they took it, but it is done at a very big scale, and they're never going to pick up on the Columbia Wetlands program right there where that grizzly bear crossed the highway, or the Creston corridor. We're working regionally at a smaller scale, so we're looking at things a little finer, and at that macro scale of all of Canada, it's useful, but it's a different scale. So I'd caution you to, or encourage you to, consider that scale and the complexity of your area. And don't be afraid to apply your local knowledge from your First Nations and your local biologists. Government and independent alike will often be able to come together and put together the local scene, because we decided we knew more about the local scene than anybody. So anyway, that's enough for that answer. Hope that works out.
Yeah, so I would just add to that the Columbia Lake corridors conservation plan is something that we're working on now with that connectivity working group that Michael described over there around Columbia Lake with the various agencies and First Nations. And we hope that becomes a bit of a template, or at least a way forward, or a blueprint for how we can be working in other corridors in the Kootenays. So trying to bridge the local regional scale is something we're going to be trying to do.
And I'd like to point out that you've just seen an insight into the workings of Kootenai Connect, where I'll say something or write something, and Marcy will improve it by about 89%. It's a complete pleasure working with her. It's not like I gave this talk, but this is not me. It's me and a lot of people. So Marcy's right at the top of that list.
Thank you, Michael. And so with that, and given the time, I think we should just, give you big applause in terms of there's been a lot of love coming your way in terms of the chat, and fabulous talk, Michael. Really, really appreciate it. So Haley, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, sounds good. And apologies to everyone whose question we didn't get to. There's quite a few we missed, but you know how it works at the time. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. Thank you, Michael, for the whirlwind tour. It was a fantastic talk. Like Marcy said, there are tons of compliments coming through in the chat if you want to have a peek there. Before we close off, we would, of course, like to thank all of our sponsors for making this work possible, and invite you to attend the upcoming talk. So next week, we have an entirely different perspective coming from Leslie Lowe, who will be presenting a talk titled, "What is a Landscape Architect and How Can We Contribute to Land Use Planning and Wildlife Habitat?" So please join us. Invite your friends if they aren't aware of this series and they would like to participate. Share the information. Thanks everybody for your time. Have a wonderful afternoon on this beautiful sunny day.